First of all, thank you to everybody for participating today. That includes both the Cohort 1 group, the Cohort 2 group, and the soon-to-be Cohort 3 of HHS Entrepreneurs. And welcome to everybody else who is here to kind of watch and see what these teams have done. For those of you who don't know what HHS Entrepreneurs is or haven't really been indoctrinated yet, at a very high level, basically the general idea is that we go out and solicit from the various operating divisions projects that are somewhat complex in nature, that require some skills that we don't really have inside the government to be able to solve. And we go and recruit people from the outside world to come in and solve these problems for no more than 12 months. That's the amount of runway they have. And it turns out this 12-month thing is really important, because if you only have 12 months to execute on something, you by definition have to do things in a slightly different way than we tend to do them in government. And it gives us a lot of excuses to sort of cut through some red tape, get rid of some unnecessary bureaucracy, and really try to execute on things in ways that are different and interesting. And we've been able to get some, I think, pretty incredible stuff done in the first cohort, and as you'll see today, in the second cohort. So I'm going to actually stop talking now and turn it over first to Bill Corr, who throughout all of this has been really our sort of patron saint in helping us kind of get this stuff through. Without Bill's support, none of the IDLF stuff would have been possible, least of all this program in particular. And then we also have Megan Smith here today, who's our still relatively new, I guess I can say, U.S. CTO, took over for, as you guys all know, Todd Park a few months ago. And Megan's going to stay for a little while, watch some of the presentations, and say a few words as well. So on that note, I will turn it over to Bill. Bill, thank you very, very much.
I wanted to start by welcoming Megan. We very much appreciate you coming over. I think the whole concept of a Chief Technology Officer for the government and one for our department has just been an enormous boost to what we do and how we do it. I know all the way back to the transition from the last administration to this one. During the transition, there was a great deal of talk about how we could empower someone as a Chief Technology Officer to bring new ideas into government, to bring new people into the government, to help us figure out what to do. I mean, one of the very first days, I can remember talking with Todd Park when he was the Chief Technology Officer. We talked about, we sit on mountains, literally mountains of data. And it's like, surely somebody can do something useful with that. But to watch how far we've gone, I think is a real tribute to the leadership, Bryan, and your team. And so maybe I should start right there and just say, could we have everybody who's on the CTO team just to raise your hand for a moment? Because I'd like us all to thank these folks because they do. And Megan, having a CTO for the whole government, I think has really focused all the departments in ways that's extremely valuable. So thank you for joining the administration and for coming over today to talk with us. I wanted to be very brief as well, just to say that the Secretary is in Cincinnati and Columbus today around open enrollment events. As you all may know, that the next open enrollment period for the Affordable Care Act starts on Saturday. Otherwise, she would have been here because she and I have the same attitude about what you all are doing. It's like, this is really cool. And, you know, I'm of a generation where it's like I'm learning as much as anybody. But to see the energy, Megan said it to me when she walked in the room, it's like, wow, the energy here is great. And that's what you all are doing, is energizing this department, energizing our colleagues, setting an example for our colleagues about how we can approach problems in a new way, bringing innovation, bringing new talents, and matching up the talents within this department with talents from outside the department. And that's especially enjoyable to watch, because I think it's the learning goes both ways, and we are extremely pleased to have those of you who've been external entrepreneurs joining us. It's been extremely valuable to have your input. Not only are you setting an example for your colleagues, but you're demonstrating to the public how the government can adapt, how the government can be agile, how the government can solve problems in new ways, can think in new ways. And we've got some skeptics in the public about that. And it really takes us showing people, not just saying it. And I think what you all do with these projects is spectacular. And we need to get greater exposure, not only here, Megan, but I think across the government at some of the things that are happening, because it's very hard, you know, to communicate to the American people, but I know they would say that's a good job be thoughtful about how to approach things in a new way. And most importantly, what you're doing is going to serve the American people better. Each of these projects produces something that just makes us do our job better and makes us have a greater impact. And our new secretary, if you haven't heard her speak, I can assure you one word you'll hear when she speaks is impact, because that's the responsibility we have, to have impact on behalf of the American people with everything we do, and you guys are doing that. So thank you to each of you who joined us from outside the government. Thank you to each of you who participated. We've got half the department represented in this room with the projects from 2014 and the new projects coming in 2015. And that is especially important, to reach every corner of the department and to continue to show people, not just tell them, but to show them how we can approach things in a new way. I especially want to say to all the HHS employees who are listening or watching that, as Bryan said to me, bring us your most vexing problems. Come forward with them and let us help you think about how we can approach them in a new way so we find the solution that benefits the American people. So I don't want to stop you from going forward with the presentations. I very much apologize that I can't join you for all of them with the secretary out. I've got some things I have to do. So thank you for giving me a chance to come by and say thank you to all of you. Thank you.
Megan, you just want to take over? Go for it.
Good to see all you guys. This is awesome.
I can't leave it, you guys.
I got to look through some of the amazing things you guys have done. It's fabulous. One of the things that the CTOs, Bryan, are responsible for in these teams, kind of the mandate, is this interesting mandate. It's how do you unleash the power of technology, data, innovation on behalf of the nation? And the thing that I think is interesting is, things don't just magically happen. People do things. And so people or talent is really what our job is. How do we unlock talent? How do we unlock talent in all kinds of ways, from within government, from outside government, to get us interacting better? And so I joined about 2 months ago. Alexander McGilvery, who's another colleague from the sort of Silicon Valley world with the general counsel of Twitter, joined at the same time. And we sort of sat down and thought with the team and with Todd, a sort of continuing legacy of Todd and Aisha's, what would we focus on? And we kind of chose 3 areas, and it's pretty interesting to see that HHS is leading already, like when we have to draw from an example, like when we're trying to convince some of the other agencies who might not be as far ahead as you guys, we can give HHS examples of the great things we're doing. But the first one is around how do we get out of the way of our most inventive Americans, our highest end innovators, and how do we do that while we still protect the American people? So an example that you guys led on in the regulation area was to take a set of apps. FDA did this sort of thing, like, how do we say we're not actually going to regulate this whole sector, please go ahead and innovate? Sort of getting ahead of things. We need to help our innovators have places like this room where they can come and have a conversation when there's a very serious question. We're about to innovate in precision medicine. We're on like the pre-Model T days of these amazing things that are going to be breakthroughs in health, and there's lots of privacy issues. There's lots of security, sort of personal issues that really matter for people that we as government leaders need to be really paying attention and listening for solutions. And there's extraordinary innovations coming in big data, in medicine itself, et cetera. So how are we, part of that dialogue and having a place where we can gather and have conversations so people don't feel like, oh, they're attacking this industry. No, they're disrupting it. Was Henry Ford really attacking horses and buggies? No, he was like inventing this next thing. And so as people come to invent, we have to not be afraid, and we have to like engage in this tough conversation and mix it up and have innovation places. Maybe sometimes we call them sandboxes or safe harbors, or places like for the transportation department. How can they think about places in our cities where drones could fly, so that there's a testing place to see what we might do? I heard about some kids who are making drones that follow you around like pets. Like, I don't know what's exactly the house, but the Suggested Future is out there in some useful way. A friend of mine said that maybe the killer app of drones is not killing, and that in fact there's a future which is really extraordinary for this stuff. We have to figure out how to make it safe. for American people. So there's sort of this opportunity there in that area. The second area we thought a lot about was our government itself. How can we better serve the American people, be better for them, and actually, to your point about data, with them? The network is two-way. There's talent all over this country. There's talent all over this world. There's talent all over government. How do we do? You guys are, again, leading with Affordable Care Act, some rough roads in the 1.0 version, but the 1.1 version, got there, and now the 2.0 version is coming out. And really, how do we sort of channel our inner Jeff Bezos and be in business, with a customer service perspective and the kind of things the commercial industries are doing with our websites and our mobile services, so that we're just extraordinary and heroic for the American people and how we serve them. And that really comes often out of the CIO's office, not CTO, but we in innovation teams can help them do their things. And also, how do we improve how we all are able to collaborate and innovate our own IT and how we're engaging there. So that felt like a really important area. And open data, open government, all of advancing this. What if instead of launching an RFP, the practice was a marketplace and an API? And then whoever wanted to show up and innovate, we didn't have to choose. We could just see what amazing things showed up. That would be an incredible difference. And then the third area we thought about is American people ourselves. How there's so much talent in this country, and some people are in these amazing innovation jobs in parts of the country. I got to be in Silicon Valley, originally from Buffalo. There's not a whole lot of, there's a tech incubator in Buffalo, but there's not a lot of innovation. We went through sort of the Rust Belt times. How do we bring back these incredible American cities? And one of the things that was great yesterday, we had all these incubator leaders from all over the country over at the White House. And they're in Idaho and Alabama. They're in Iowa. They're in Hawaii. They're not just all in Boston, Austin, here. So it's like 1776 equivalent. How do we make those people visible who are just like you all, here, doing this innovation work in their own cities and their own places and make the American future? And how do we make more Americans feel like they're, part of that and be able to lead within that? I get to go to the first Robotics Nationals every year, which I love. It's like the Friday Night Lights of STEM. It's like kindergarten to first to 12th grade. It's 20 minutes bus ride from Ferguson. And I think, here we are in St. Louis, and there's this one set of American kids who get this world, and there's this other set of American kids who get this other world, and it's totally unfair. And so I already met the congressman from Ferguson. We're like, we're renting some buses this year in April. We're bringing these kids. But how do we connect all the kids to the kind of things you guys are doing, these kinds of innovations? I got to take acoustics from Professor Bose, like the speaker guy, and super cool. And one of the things he said to us is, you guys are hardworking people. You're doing your thing. The most important thing for you to do is find what you're really passionate about. A lot of people on the planet, people have a lot of diverse interests. If you do what you care about, you're going to be unstoppable. And I think that the labs, like this lab, like the Idea Lab, are the places, the nexus for these kinds of meetings where people's passion and the huge problems that we face can meet, and we can solve things. And I love that you sort of, I don't know, I guess we're talking to some HHS employees also through video or others, but also you guys in the room. How do we take outsiders and also the people who are the talent within this agency to kind of unlock it? And one of the key things about the CTO's offices is to keep us really small in staff. You want to keep us not zero, because otherwise we can't do anything. But you want to keep us small enough that that we actually are causing you all, like IPOing through our teamwork with everybody else, and that we're sort of bridging together and doing things within the agency in the department that's trying to solve that problem. We can skunk works a little. We have a little bit of protected space where we design and develop innovations, and then we launch it through the place where it belongs, where it lives, where it should stand up. That's what that's about. I'm super excited to see some of the stuff. Unfortunately, there's this PCAST meeting today, which is the President's Advisors on Science and Tech, so I have to go back over there a little bit. So any quick questions before we jump in? Good. Okay.
Here's your chance.
I know. Okay.
Great.
Anyway.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thanks, guys. That was fantastic. I really appreciate the comments. Julie, should we just jump right in?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. So who's up? CMS is first, right?
Yeah.
All right. Who's the controls? I have the control.
You have the control.
I will bestow you with power. So the format for this is we've got everybody doing, I think, 10-minute presentations
Yes.
and
And I'm the
5 minutes of Q&A. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
10 minutes and 5.
And Julie will be the draconian timekeeper. So let's go.
Great.
All right, so my name is Richard Gilbert. I'm the internal entrepreneur, and our external entrepreneur is Viars. We're with CMS, and we're working as a program integrity. We deal with all things provider enrollment. And so when we first heard about the entrepreneur program, we immediately thought of NPES, which is the system that controls the NPI, which is the unique identifier used in nearly every single healthcare transaction in the country. It is used to validate data. It's used to track records, and we've had challenges with accuracy and accessibility of the data. So we thought, you know what, a single person can come in, bring in some new ideas, and really have a big impact in a short period of time. So a little bit more background on what the NPI is and what it does. Like I said, it's used in every single healthcare transaction out there. Claims, all billions of them a year, have NPIs on them. Every prescription you receive has an NPI on it. Records management. Over 25,000 new NPIs are issued every month to doctors, doctors' offices, hospitals, pharmacists. And with that data getting downloaded 2,000 times a month and merged with other data sets within the government, within the private sector, it's a really, really critical tool across the industry. So when we have some challenges with it, we thought it was really important to address them.
Sure, and probably the primary problem with the NPES data is the staleness of the data. So many of the primary practice addresses are just out of date. 2/3 of the data is 3 years old or older. Probably the main issue is that there's no incentive for providers to go and update the information. So really what we've tried to do is lower the barriers and just reduce friction and make it easier for providers to update the data, giving them more opportunities to do that. Also, the system itself was built, the existing system was built in 2005, so the technology was considered very expensive and complicated to update. So our approach to modernizing NPES really started with community engagement. We did that really with in 2 ways, primarily a Google group, public Google group where we solicited ideas, information, how we could improve the system, and also through stakeholder interviews. So we would just collect ideas. I would categorize the 2 groups of sort of the provider community, people that updated this information, maintained the information, and sort of data hounds. That would be researchers that would consume this data, we put investigative journalists or people that use the data and download the data. We looked at the existing system, evaluated not only the software but the processes that surround the data and how we could improve that to essentially improve that data quality and make it fresher. So what we ended up with was a full redesign of NPES. So we started out with some mock-ups and then moved that into a prototype. So the new system uses an open source stack. It's new technology within NPES. This is a bit different. We've included an API in the new system so that, for example, when you enter your data for Medicare enrollment as a provider, that it can be passed on, and essentially providing lots of ways for people to get the data. You could do NPI checks without actually downloading the entire data set. You can just simply hit the API. One of the other things, for example, bulk updates. So a healthcare provider or a person that manages this data could just manage a spreadsheet and upload all of the information at one time. In the old system, you would have to log in. So basically, providers don't update this information. It's their staff. So if you have a hospital of 300 or 400 doctors, and it's your job to update all of this information, you would have to go log in as each individual provider and all the security issues around that 300 times. So what happens? The data doesn't get updated. So we really try to redesign the system to work the way that providers work, to allow that person to come in, say, I'm working on behalf of this provider, and essentially update these 300 records under one user account. I would also say, I mean, simple things that we changed, like allowing the back button to work. It's a big deal. Before, if you hit the back button, you have to start the application over. And
that button's so dangerous.
It was kind of a big deal, and being able to stop the application, come back later, and finish it. That I mean, that sounds simple, but that's kind of where we, that was our starting point. And also not allowing the records to pend. Essentially, you fill out the information, everything's okay, you get your number, you get your update immediately. We also made some changes to make it more responsive, email updates, and by responsive, I mean display properly on a mobile device as well as a desktop.
So currently, the project is further along than we ever expected. When we started with Alan, we were expecting this to be a plan for change, and as we developed the prototype, it really got to the point where, hey, this doesn't need to just be a blueprint. It can actually be the new solution. So what we've done is we've taken the prototype code and we've moved it over to our system developer who's hardening it, putting it through the phases for security, and really making sure that it is up to the standard to be a government system of record. We're continuing our operational planning for email outreach. We're going to basically be reaching out to all 4.1 million owners of these MPIs and saying, this is the data we have on file. You need to come in and take a look at it. We're continuing to work with other partners, private organizations, other government agencies, state Medicaid agencies, to have them integrate with the system. Rather than copying out the data hundreds or thousands of times all over the place in these different areas, have them actually connect directly to it. And then working with our other partners to figure out what else we can do to make NPES relevant to the provider community. Again, as Alan said, they're used to coming in, creating an NPI, and walking away. How can we make updating this information more real-time for them, more relevant to them? Maybe they don't even need to come to the system. If they can just update it as part of other processes, then that's definitely a benefit for us. When we start looking at what the impact of the overall project is, for us, it really broke down into two different areas. One, the idea of having an entrepreneur on, and then the NPES program itself. So the entrepreneur, being able to bring in the right person with the right skill set quickly was huge. I mean, we didn't have to go through the normal hiring process and then wondering, okay, are we getting the right person? We were able to actually develop a plan and begin implementing a solution in half the time and a 30th of the cost of what it would normally take. We didn't have to go through the normal contract procurement, which can take months, and then long requirements development processes, stakeholder interviews the entire time. These consultants and contractors are sitting there trying to figure out what it is they need to build, building the product, not necessarily getting it right the first time, going back, starting. By having Alan on and we were able to do the interviews while we're building the solution, and it was just an iterative process that moves very, very quickly. We're instituting new technology. The technology stack that we're proposing is not something that is used today within CMS, but it's used outside. It's pretty good. I think Instagram, you've got heard of that, reasonable. So these are the types of things we want to do: is have this technology architecture that can be a model for other programs. And the biggest impact for us in our center was the idea of institutionalizing the entrepreneur and saying, you know what, we've got challenges in our center. How can we take this concept of somebody with a specialized skill set and bring them in for a 12-month period to help us think about it differently, to solve things quickly. So we are going to be allocating resources specifically to that. From the program perspective, NPES, we know that we're going to reduce our operational costs. We know we're going to be able to be more responsive to the needs of the community and the changes. We know that if we can take hours or days worth of work and turn it into a couple minutes, we know we're reducing the provider burden. And for target metrics, once the system launches, we're going to be tracking adoption of features and accessing of the different APIs, data accuracy, data quality. But I think that overall for us this changed our way of thinking. You know, it really made us say, well, how do we approach system development? Is there a way that we can make sure we're going to see what we're getting before we spend millions of dollars on it? I don't know if there's any immediate questions on the
I'd like to just say a couple of quick things. So first of all, Shantanu walked in a little while ago. Shantanu runs CPI, which is the group that within CMS that you guys work for. Can I relate the phone call that you made after you saw Alan's presentation a couple months ago? So maybe the best phone call I've ever gotten since I've been at HHS was from Shantanu a couple of months ago, and these guys presented this work to Shantanu about what they've been doing for the past 10 months. Immediately after that, Shantanu calls me and says, Bryan, I just got this presentation. The work that they've done is absolutely incredible, and I want to know, how do we get an HHS entrepreneur, how do we build this capacity within CPI permanently? The reason why that's the best phone call I've gotten since I've been at HHS is because what it means is that we never have to do another HHS Entrepreneurs project with Shantanu. Because he gets it, right? Like, he understands that there's value in bringing this type of talent in for time-limited periods, letting them kind of run, letting them experiment, pushing back against the status quo. And Alan, I'd like you to say a couple more words, if you can, in a second about some of the challenges you had with, like, the sort of tech stack and getting that accepted by the, you know, the world. It's an interesting component, right? But the thing to me is that if this is the goal of the Idea Lab, right? If we can get the other 637 or whatever divisions within HHS to realize the same thing that Shantanu realized, our work here is done. We can pack up and go home, right? And so, like, to me, this is a perfect example of kind of where we want to be. So yeah, if you wouldn't, I think it's valuable to say a few more words if you can about that tech stuff. It's really
well, yeah. So it wasn't really stuff that was really out there or obscure. It's fairly mature technology, but not common within CMS. So I was using a lot of examples. Hey, you know, they got Pinterest, USA Today, Library of Congress using this technology. It's not, you know, Netflix and different folks that are using it. So I was always trying to use that, and I think that CMS, there's a big propensity they, you know, want to buy stuff, and I'm sort of, you know, an open source guy, and think, hey man, you know, we could just we could hire a whole team of people for the, you know, the software licenses for the stuff. So that's an ongoing challenge, is trying to introduce this new technology. But I think that we're making some headway.
Yeah, I mean, I think what this did, and you kind of have that in one of the bullet points there, but it really sort of laid a path, right, that others can now potentially follow to look at using Python or Django or frameworks that are used commonly in the outside world and have, by the way, lots and lots of people who know how to support those things that we simply never experiment. And so by doing this and building something that works and then having support from folks like Shantanu to actually get it done, I think we start to convince the tech shops that are sort of focused in other directions that they need to look in other directions that we're kind of moving in now. So I think it's really important.
Another big piece of that is the, if you look, we were talking to OMB, the Office Manager's Budget, and just every single group, the IT costs and the technology costs are just eating all the budgets. And that means the American people get, like, squeezed, right? All the programs get squeezed. Well, the IT, software licenses, stuff that's really incredibly important and highly responsible work to share the kind of stuff that you did and help people shift into using, you know, a lot of open source, procuring where it makes sense, instead of shifting how we do that just in order to just be responsible leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a comment too. I'm Kim Klein from HRSA, and I want to applaud you guys because one of the things that we're looking at is our health shortages designation. It's called HIPSA scores, and we're redoing our whole HIPSA designation approach and trying to also change it from a paper-based process to a automated process. one of the big things that we're looking at in a HRSA designation is provider to population ratio. The AMA has a database that is outdated and old-fashioned and also riddles our processes and our systems with antiquated data. And so we were looking at the NPI score as importing it into the new system to sort of revamp the whole HRSA designation process. That's workforce, and workforce is a big piece of this administration's drive, which is getting providers, primary care providers, into populations and communities that need it most. So this NPI work that you guys are doing has implications for HRSA and our system. And so, again, I just, from a context perspective, how it impacts other agencies is huge. And so just a comment from HRSA and also a request to sort of engage with you guys on this because it's a big piece of our redesign.
I would say that people are already building against the API. So there is a prototype system that's up in the Amazon cloud now, and there are people that are building APIs actively. And it's fairly easy to do. The idea was the API would have a very low bar and be easy to implement.
Very cool. Well, Julie kicked me under the table, so that means it's time to go. My shin's going to be bruised by the end of the day.
Go back to teach us, but
no problem. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on. ASPA time. Kristann and Mark, you guys want to kick it off?
Right, we'll do. I guess I'll figure out which one the question they can move. I'm Mark Weber, and I'm the internal leader of this group, and Kristann Orton, our external kicker of certain body parts, and Barnes, who is the person who is the glue that keeps all of this together. So anyway, we took on the ASPA publication planning and clearance process, and bottom line here, I like to tell the story. It's like this is a process that was put into place here in the department in 1986. It hasn't worked since, but we continue to do it. People have been loyal about doing it. Others, like myself, I like to say I was the expert gamer of the process. I knew how to get around it, how to get things out, get stuff done. And then I found myself in charge of the process. So I like, a little bit of the fox in the hen house. And, it's like, okay, well, now that I'm in charge of it, I need to fix it or figure out what we're really trying to do. And interestingly enough, it was a process that actually was implemented and devised more as a punitive process. It was more catching people doing things and stopping it and slowing down stuff. And it was, paper based on forms. And really, we sat down and looked at, what were we trying to accomplish? And there was an initial step over the years to put the forms online, like that was going to solve something. It just perpetuate the problem. And as we started digging into what we were trying to accomplish and why, ASPA would be involved and what is ASPA's added value, we came along, CDC came along with the TIPS campaign. And so this said to me, it can be done. And there are a number of examples across the department about great work. So what CDC did, and I still don't know how they got to do it, but I love the fact that it happened, is before the TIPS campaign came out, they set two main bold goals, as I saw them. That as a result of the TIPS communications work, there would be 50,000 quitters in terms of tobacco and 500,000 quit attempts. They launched the campaign, and I have talked to the statisticians and the folks who worked on coming up with these metrics, and they were sweating bullets as this was going through it. And it just, what if we don't reach the goal? What's going to look like? Blah, blah, blah. Well, the good news is, or the great news is, twofold. They exceeded the goal, impact 100,000 quitters, and 1.6 million quit attempts. It may be updated since then. The campaign has gone on further. And so American public wins, our statisticians win, the program wins. It's like we can go back and justify, it's like additional budgets for more communications work because here's the demonstrated impact. So anyway, this being the gold standard of what's possible around communications work in the department. So what can be and what is. This is 2012. We have data too for 2013. ASPA reviewed 737 print and web publications, 141 videos, 35 communications contracts, also hundreds of millions of dollars on stuff. Quite often the target audience could be in males and females age 0 and up. You know, it's like, all right, okay, and no impact. It was all about the process. It's like, just clear it. I just want it cleared, get it cleared. And we'd ask the question, well, what are you going to do once it's done? Well, we just want it cleared, you know, and so it's like, okay, so how to go ahead and approach this problem? The approach within the department, having a huge cultural shift, the approach is as important as what ultimately came out of this. But we found that approaching the work in terms of doing great things better, it's like building on the great work the department does. We may not have known the impact, we may not have known, but we do know the American public knows so much more about health, wellness as a result of the department's efforts. So we're just going to make that assumption. Close stakeholder engagement, involved the communications staff from across the department from the get-go. Had meeting reports, what were your ideas, what do you want us to do, how can ASPA support you? And keeping the focus on the common goals, and that was getting to that impact. We all want to improve the health and well-being of the nation. That keeps us all together. We brought in Kristann. You're getting all excited here. Help us really with the lean methodology, focused on what are the bare necessities. I had a lot of fun with the character Blue in terms of bare necessities. We won't go into that. I'm sure all the agencies are tired of hearing it. We implemented, what is the new tool? We're not just, again, not putting forms online, and that would support the culture change. So we came up with a tool that really helps focus on impact versus a process. And then this was a foreign concept to my colleagues across the department, but we are going to trust our colleagues and empower them to make decisions about what comes to ASPA for review and what doesn't. And they're like, where do you work? You're going to trust us? And I'm like, well, we're going to put guidelines, and then ultimately, management is held accountable for if they put something out that's pretty stupid. They can't say ASPA approves it, one thing. On the other end, we're not wasting a lot of our time on sort of routine, mundane things that really don't need to take up our time. So we put together a set of criteria to help reinforce trust and the empowerment of frontline managers. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristann to tell you about where we have ended up.
So this is a quick look at the tool, and what it really does is it guides people through this new approach. It gets people thinking in a different way, just by nature of sort of taking them through the process. As Mark was saying, that review criteria was key because not only did it say, hey, we trust you to figure out what needs to be reviewed and doesn't, but we also created the tool to be used for everything across the board. So it's not just the things we review that take a strategic communication planning approach, but everything that's produced. Clearly defining the audience, how many people are in your target audience, and what's the measured impact. One of the cool things, we got this quote from Cam over at FDA, and he's got a degree in communication science. He says, your approach totally follows what I learned in college. And so all of the people that we worked with who were doing this said, yeah, hey, I recognize this. This is something that really works along with the way we want to approach things. Supporting collaboration. So it was key that we get, when both FDA and CDC are working on something around smoking, we get them to work together. We looked at alignment. So what is it how is your project helping to promote the priorities, the strategic priorities within your organization? Clearly identifying those so that we're not just creating things that are sort of off in left field. Looking at internal review, there were a lot of things that were coming up through the different agencies that weren't going through their own Office of Communications, and so really help them get control of the whole process and managing the workflow. And then reporting outcomes. So this creates a database of all these strategic plans, so those 1,000 plans that came across our desk in 2012. Anybody now across HHS can go look at those plans, see the impact that was reported and build on other people's great work. So looking at the progress and where we've gotten to in the last year, since we launched this on June 1st, we reviewed only 60 plans compared to 80 per month last year. So there was a huge difference in terms of our ability to focus on the things that mattered. Over 300 users have been trained, so we've got a huge engagement across all the different agencies. We also engaged all the communications directors to create a custom rollout plan, because for some agencies, each agency has their own workflow for how communications get developed and deployed, and we wanted to make sure that we were flexible enough to be able to fit into their environment. This one was key. Over 75% of plans include collaborators, so we're very clearly measuring to make sure that that collaboration is happening and pushing on it if it's not. We've been able to streamline our process down to something that is more manageable and allows for the quicker turnaround of communications that's required in the digital age. And then getting each plan to actually include one goal. And this is where our focus is coming up. We have each plan creating a goal, but sometimes it's just a number of hits. Don't know who those hits are coming from, so really getting that to hone in on a measurable impact, something that is actually actionable. Okay, so going forward, where we're really focusing on in the next year is on this impact. So looking at this as a key performance indicator, making sure that management is actually looking at the data that comes back about how much impact a project has had, and using that to determine how to allocate their funds to the company. Right? I spoke with somebody this morning, and they said, well, so how are you going to use this data? And I said, well, your manager will use it. So, really getting people to start thinking about that. And it's sort of an organic thing. So, looking at the users, these are the people that are out there really setting the bar, people like the CDC team. Using the communications managers, making sure they're using those measurements, and then the performance managers, we're starting to look at from a performance perspective, how are we building this up into the overall performance management of the agency. So that's all I have. I just wanted to say thank you to the HHS Ignite team for all of their support throughout the year. It's actually been a fantastic experience for me. And any questions?
I just want to say one quick thing, which is, this is the first time in my experience in government that I've ever heard of a government or like a group within government telling other groups that they don't want to do something that they're currently doing, giving up control, right? Giving up responsibility. And that, I think, is it's great, right? We need to do that much more often. This whole idea of trusting people is critical for us to be able to actually respond to things in a faster way, right? And the fact that you guys realized that you didn't actually need to do the checking that you've been doing for decades is kind of amazing. And then actually, just as a side note, I don't know if I told you this story, but I was over at ACL, and the person that you guys have been working with at ACL, I was talking about this project, and she's like, oh my God, we got rid of the form. It was amazing. And so like this is something that's resonating out there. I don't know if I told you that story, but anyway, it's really, it's just a great example, I think, of all of that stuff.
Yes, I was just listening. Is there any way, this is fantastic, by the way, because I think all of us have a lot of fun with our conversation about this. Is there a way to build in sort of a feedback learning loop so that as these users and managers are using it to get their feedback, to make modifications, feature modifications that based actually on user experience?
Yeah, so are you talking about the American user experience with our publications or the...
Well, I was actually more thinking about the managers, but the American experience.
Yeah, so there is, to that point, there's a whole evaluation cycle. So one of the new things we've introduced is you can't just launch and leave. You actually have to enter evaluation metrics as you go, and you need to tell us how you're making mid-course corrections to try and do a better job with your project. We are working very, Alan talked about an iterative process. That's definitely the way our tool is being developed. develop. So we're closely aligned with all of the different groups out there. You know, we've created a Yammer community that really tries to start to get their feedback. We're actually doing a bunch of interviews right now with all of the different communication directors as well as the users.
So we just launched 2.0, version 2.0, based on feedback from the users. Right. And we're doing a series of interviews right now that just started to get some of the preliminary feedback. And we will continue to collect that to improve the system and make sure that it becomes more widely adopted.
I was going to ask a Hunter from CT, so I love the tips example.
Everybody else does too, let me tell you.
I'm curious about, sort of on Bryan's point on how do you get out of the business of being in control mode. Part of it is whether it bites you in the ass because you want. So I'm wondering if there's a way you're building into this some experience with what you're not reviewing and how you can validate that you shouldn't have reviewed and everything was good because you trusted. And that helps feedback to some of these other processes where we're micromanaging all these things that we don't need to. So I'm curious if you have something built into the evaluation of this to show that it was an appropriate step that you took to get out of that.
I would say, no, we don't have something built in. Great idea. Trying to figure that out. The steps we have taken, though, is provided a criteria. CDC has lots of comments. And one of the challenges right now in this phase of the project is because I know we have such a good working relationship with the comms shops across the department. They are much more willing to call and check in and say, do you all want to see this, or can we just go with it? And CDC, the staff down there, led by Catherine and everybody, it's awesome. I mean, just again across the department. And so a challenge for us moving forward is how do you systematize that so it's not as much built on personalities and the people working together. So we're in that phase, and I am looking forward to the first one that pops out. It's like, why didn't ASPA review this? But I have, in our work with the group, it's like, well, it's twofold. You know, we're working with each other. We have the common goal. And then the other part is, if something's not achieving the outcomes desired, it's like, at least we have a goal, and something we're measuring to, and we're not going to keep doing the same thing. You know, it's like, let's celebrate that we're not achieving a goal because we're going to recalibrate what we're doing. And so it's helping all of us get out of that punitive mindset that we're the environment that we've created actually for ourselves. And we need to think about the evaluation.
Well, one thing I would point out is that we have created it, made the system so it can be for internal review only within the agency. So we have actually made it so that you can use it for things that ASPA never needs to see. And so we're tracking that and looking at, so how many of those are coming across versus, and it also makes sure that even those things that maybe are lower in quality still take a strategic communication planning approach, which improves the quality.
You know, it strikes me that a real test of success here also is going to be how you guys actually do respond to the first one that comes across the transom as something that you should
have my resignation letter ready.
That would be the wrong response. I mean, I'm serious, right? I mean, the right response. We tend to overreact to things like that by writing new rules and regulations that prevent things from happening, right? Whereas instead what we should do is use these as examples to teach people, you know, this is actually, you know, we should have thought about X, Y, and Z, and then let them go back to the drawing board and try it again, right? So, I mean, that's, to me, one of the real tests, right, is what happens then. And you know, you said it, we've got a lot of great employees at the department, and if we can just embed more trust into the ecosystem and push decision-making down as far as we possibly can for almost everything, it's going to change the game, right? So this is, to me, a great thing.
The other thing I was going to say is that also pushing that responsibility down also makes people think a little bit more about what they're putting out there, right?
Exactly.
Not because they're thinking, oh, well, ASPA doesn't have my back on this, so I better make sure that it's good.
You get better products out of it.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay, I got to cut it off because, again, Julie.
Thank you all.
Silently. All right, next we've got Seth and Krishna from HRSA talking about a bunch of interesting stuff around medical malpractice and adverse action.
Thank you. I'm Seth Marcus with HRSA.
Krishna, and I also want to introduce Kim Klein from HRSA and Orton as well, our executive sponsors today. And we have the only nationwide source of medical malpractice and adverse action data. We hired Krishna for this project to help visualize this data in new and innovative ways and make it more open and accessible at significantly lower costs. And first I'll tell you a little bit about what our program does and how we work before we dig deep into the project itself. HRSA operates a program called the National Practitioner Data Bank, or Data Bank. It's an important safety mechanism for protecting patients. And we store over 1.1 million reports of healthcare practitioners, providers, and suppliers with a history of malpractice, payments, license suspension, exclusion from health plans, criminal convictions, et cetera, other adverse actions. And examples of a data bank report might be a surgeon who did not follow the standards of care and had a medical malpractice claim paid on his or her behalf, or perhaps a pharmacist who abused his prescriptive authority and lost his DEA license. Those are very typical examples of what might be in the data bank. And every year, about 70,000 of these types of reports are added into the data bank by state boards, hospitals, government agencies, or other types of organizations. On an annual basis, over 5 million queries are made against these 1.1 million reports as organizations provide background checks and vet the credentials of aspiring providers. And again, as I mentioned, we are the only nationwide source of this data. And we've seen increasing requests for this type of data from researchers, stakeholders, media, for national and statewide summaries. An example might be a reporter researching the impact of tort reform on Texas, which happened about 10 years ago. And there's widespread belief that malpractice payments are a major driver in overall healthcare costs, which is not necessarily true. And the New York Times, in fact, did an article last week, partly based on the data in our data bank. And our small research team handles numerous of these type of requests for data, custom extracts, et cetera, on an annual basis. And we just don't really have the staffing to handle all these things. So we're hoping to provide a different approach. And recognizing the high customer service burden, about 2 years ago, we attempted to make this data more accessible to the public on our website. It was a valiant effort, but it was a custom-coded, expensive contractor solution that was very difficult and time-consuming to maintain and refresh. It also had limited analytical functionality. Many users would just skip the tool and go right to the data download button and then spend hours and hours working on it in Excel, manipulating it, building their tables and graphs and whatever they needed. So it wasn't also not really meeting the spirit of open data in the way that we were hoping it would. So we wanted users to have a more interactive experience tied to a more powerful analytical engine. Users should be able to drill down, summarize up, and compare multiple fields over time for advanced analytical and trending capabilities. We wanted users to be able to quickly generate graphs and tables and put them directly into their research without having to download and manipulate all the time. And also in line with OMB's Cloud First policy, we wanted to leverage some of the newer technologies that were out there to do this rapidly and at low cost.
So we identified some low-cost dashboard and interactive mapping software called Tableau that met all of those requirements. Tableau resides in the cloud, allows for rapid deployment, requires minimal maintenance to update and refresh the data. It clearly would be a huge advancement in analytical functionality, allowing users to get immediate value out of the data by customers to download and manipulate the data in Excel. However, we know that without good data, maps and dashboards can be misleading. We had to ensure that the data that used to generate the dashboard was optimized, complete, and accurate. We dug into the project and we realized there were some data issues under the hood that needed to be addressed first. So we paused the dashboard development effort temporarily and made a pivot towards data quality. We went, what were the quick win opportunities to improve the data to the system to ensure the dashboard was accurate as possible? One of the first things we realized was the address information in there was incomplete and inconsistent. We used a low-cost web service to geocode all the addresses in the system, and street addresses are now validated on the fly, just like you see for Google Maps. Second, we know that that CMS, NPI, National Provider Identifier, or NPI data, can uniquely identify practitioners and their locations. Although users can add NPI in the report, many historical data bank reports did not include this number. So we partnered with Alan, our fellow entrepreneur at CMS, to obtain the full MPI data set and incorporated it as reference metadata. And we also provided him the same technology to geocode all of their data to ensure data accuracy. So we're really providing that two-way street within the organization. We looked at, we looked at the on-screen process used to submit forms. Using design thinking, looking over someone's shoulder, we uncovered confusing instructions, tasks that required too many steps, and other obstacles for submission of accurate reports. We documented 23 specific recommendations for streamlining forms and pre-populating data as much as possible from all these different data sets. And the impact of this will be faster report submissions with fewer errors. Now, I'd like to show you the dashboard, but because the technical issues of having internet access and trying to do a live demo is too much. So I'm just going to stick with what we're going to do with on the map itself. And it's because the reason is that, our data is protected behind the firewall, and we will be launching fairly soon. But this is actually showing you an interactive map that you couldn't have seen before. It kind of gives you the summarized data in terms of quickly understanding it, of looking at how many reports are in a map based on even cross-reference data such as the census data. And what we want to really talk about is tort reform. And so let's go ahead and dig deep into Texas and say, oh, Texas is a pretty high report in looking at tort reform itself. And so one of the cool things that you can see here is that you've got, last time you just had all this stuff in a grid in an Excel spreadsheet that you had to download and actually create this type of grids yourself. And here what you can see is on the impact of 2003, this orange line is a medical malpractice payment, and you can clearly see it's gone down. So what was interesting about this map is that at the same token, we said, wow, we really see that tort reform has made a big difference. And so then, what is it that we can, take away that, great, tort reform is helping reduce malpractice payments. But what's interesting is that we're like, but on the second thought, we started to see adverse actions start to rise. And we're like, well, are doctors being sued more? Well, what's really cool about that is that that was the assumption that we made. And what we learned is that because we could use the filters on the other side, that when we started to take a look at that hypothesis that our team had and said, let's get rid of doctors, what we really found was nurses. So, nurses were the biggest impact of adverse action. So, what's really cool about that is that, we can test hypotheses very quickly and look at the data and then look for correlations that can sit there and dig deeper into the data. And this type of analytical tool and interactivity provided by this tool was not available. So having that data accuracy and then having it now in an interactive form really allowed us to ask questions that we could have never asked before. And now what's really great about it is researchers can export this data as an Excel, or they can even cut and paste it as a PDF. So instead of creating custom reports, they can literally just do it from the tool itself, bring it into the reports, and now they're actually doing better publications. So we also wanted to take a look at what we can leverage Tableau license for even further. So what are the other opportunities was there to visualize key program information? We learned that Tableau has out-of-the-box integration with Salesforce.com, the customer service management tool to use up the data bank help desk. Currently, each week, our contractors extract the data from Salesforce, puts it in Excel, manipulates it into a boring report with the top 10 issues. As an alternative, you plug the same exact data into Tableau with the Salesforce data, and within 2 days, we had a working prototype of the customer service dashboard, which is being updated in real time. Because this meant because this is only meant within our protected network, we unfortunately can only show you screenshots. But this dashboard was created in 2 days. I mean, can you imagine getting this type of data and trying to do it within Excel? And what's really great, the beauty about this is that we've got deeper insights into customer service trends. We don't even need to rely on the contractor report anymore. Now we can just do our own interactive analysis, and the impact is we can make more informed decisions about optimizing customer service. And one of the other key takeaways that I wanted to show was looking at the largest heat map, self-query, passwords, and registration. What's really great is that we're already looking at password resets, right? Password resets in this day and age should not be the biggest issue. So what we've actually done during this creating videos to actually, do some of the things for self-query registration and password to address that already. And what's really great about that is based on the dashboard, we can measure that impact to our customers.
So let me just briefly close up by explaining what the next steps are and where we are. So first, our dashboard prototype is complete. We'd like to get some more feedback from actual users. So we're going to go back out and do a usability test with custom users, finalize the design, and we hope to get that published and deployed over the next 3 to 6 months. The geocoding service is already live in production. The impact of that is that the immediate thing that we found is we had a reduction in the amount of undeliverable mail that we're sending out. So we used to get 10,000 pieces of return mail every year, and that number's already starting to go down. So that's going to save us paper, time, money, effort, et cetera. The historical MPI data, again, is being added to the database right now. And over the next few months, we'd like to work with the CMS team and establish a monthly refresh process so we can keep that data fresh, either through their API or we'll work out some mechanism to make that work without having to spend tens of thousands of contractor dollars. Next, we have the requirements already for streamlining those reporting screens, those very clunky screens. And so we're going to work with our contractors to make those code changes and move forward with that over the next couple of months as well. And also the new help desk dashboard. So we have a prototype working, like Krishna said. We got it done in about 2 days, and we're going to work to tweak that design and make it operational over the next couple of months. That's going to be internal facing only, just for our internal management team. And just to conclude, we're very, very appreciative to Bryan and the HHS leadership team for giving us access to the Entrepreneurs program. It really has been a very positive experience for us. Krishna has helped us think differently about things, think about data, think about technology, think about ways we can do things better, cheaper, faster, and nudging us more towards these agile processes. So it's been very helpful. It proves that you also don't need to spend $1 million for a solution, for something that actually is going to really work and really help the program move forward. So again, we thank you so much for your time, and we're here to answer any questions.
You guys went a little bit over time, so we only have time for a couple of questions. Go for it.
Yeah. Bryan Lee, this is so great. And probably 50 people want to ask the same question I have, which is, are you running in Tableau's cloud, or are you running in sort of a cloud provider running Tableau?
It's our own, it's internal cloud running Tableau. So we have a server license.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is there a way I can sort of take everything you did security-wise and use it in CDC?
Absolutely, and that's a FedRAMP. Yeah, so we're in a FedRAMP approved service. So yeah.
That's one of the things that we at the Idea Lab have been trying to help people with is transferring and working with Frank and Keyon to kind of make that question not get asked anymore. So
I want to be the last one to ask it.
Quickie, Jacob Ryder from ONC. Why would you do monthly? Why can't you just aim at the API and then it'll be real time? You don't have to import. You just use their data where it lives. Right?
I mean, we're working towards that.
Okay, mashup.
I'm just curious to thinking about how you arrived at Tableau as a solution as opposed to similar products such as ClickView. I mean, did you already have the internal licenses, or?
No, we just I'm a person that we looked at like a lot of the ones. I mean, we're just trying to take a look at what can we easily get and in terms of moving forward, right? I mean, we don't want to go through this huge collaborative process in terms of doing all of the requirements. I mean, I'm only here for 12 months, so I'm a pick, choose, run. So that type of thing is that like I always sit there and say, drive the car that you currently have, and at least it'll get you to where you need to be. Don't try to sit there and look for Ferraris and other stuff. I think that's what it is, right? It's the lowest cost solution that we can take a look at.
And we did take a look at initially SaaS, MicroStrategy, and maybe some of the big guys in the BI world, and it just was too expensive. It takes too long and too much maintenance. So we're looking for a much cheaper, lightweight tool.
And that's a great point, right? I mean, you only have 12 months. You can't engage in a lengthy procurement. We got to figure out ways of doing quick, dirty, cheap. Kind of like let's prototype, let's see how it works, and go from there.
I mean, there's just a difference between some of the BI stuff is that you're talking the impact is still the same, right? And then I think that's what was our thing, like the total cost of a couple of licenses, I think was like under $20,000. And when you're taking a look at MicroStrategy or BI, you're talking, not just the license itself, but there has to be 3 support people, supporting all that, right? So like, anybody that's learned Excel could, get this and do their All right, I got to cut you off. Thank you guys very much. All right, the ATF team, Dan, Blair, Keyon, Jared, you guys are all.
All right, good morning. My name is Dan Koutstaal, and I'm a part of the ACF, Administration for Children and Families, HHS Entrepreneurs team, which includes Blair, Corcoran, Jared Goralnick, our external entrepreneur, Amelia, Popham, and Keyon Smith. And at the onset of our project, we were really interested in how design thinking could be used to help grantees solve challenges. In fact, we've done a lot of work around that, particularly working with motive strategies and contractor to help train our staff internally and do some training for grantees too. In addition, we've worked with Jared on a series of projects, and one of the common themes, I think, is that he's helped us to think about defining problems a little bit differently that's led to innovation. So we're going to start with Blair telling us about design thinking.
Okay. So our office provides millions of dollars to hundreds of organizations across the country to help low-income families rise above poverty. But as we all know, poverty is a highly complex social issue, so our grantees are constantly looking for new ways to address the many challenges that their clients are facing. Unfortunately, in working with our grantees to address these challenges, we found that traditional approaches to problem solving have been unsuccessful in creating solutions to the types of challenges that our grantees are facing. And we know this because we have seen the same grantees request assistance for the same problems year after year after year. Because of this, we're taking a different approach. With 3 pilot grantees, we're teaching them design thinking and then helping them use the methodology in order to address a particular issue that they're facing. So some of you may be asking what design thinking is and how it's any different. And we believe that what makes design thinking different are these 4 things. We're going to talk briefly about them. Empathy. Design thinking is all about empathy, and empathy is all about human needs and desires. Using conversation and observation, you gain empathy for the context and environment in which people live. You need to understand their needs and desires. And it's only when you understand people's needs and desires that you can create solutions that actually address the root issue, the root cause of an issue. I know that when we work with grantees, we mean to be creating empathetic solutions, but too often we propose solutions to problems while never leaving our desks or never talking to clients, and our solutions often miss the mark because of this. Defining the problem. So this sounds pretty self-explanatory, but in design thinking, you wait to define the problem until after the empathy stage so that you can use what you've heard and learned to make sure that you're solving the right problem. So say, for example, a grantee calls and says they're having trouble getting their clients employed. Using a traditional problem-solving approach, you may start thinking about all the different ways you can help them get their clients employed. Maybe you recommend they partner with some new employers or hire a few more job developers. Well, in design thinking, through the interviews that you will have done with clients, employers, and other stakeholders, you may find that the real issue is something else completely. Maybe it's job readiness. You may find that clients may not have the skills, technical or social, for the jobs that are available. So the problem that we should be solving then is not to get our clients employed, but how to figure out how to get them job ready. Ideation. So this is often considered the brainstorming approach, and it's design thinking. It's when you propose solutions to the redefined problem, taking into consideration the needs and desires of your clients and users. It's often run without constraints, and people are encouraged to throw out wild ideas. When we normally problem solve, we're really cognizant of our constraints, and they act like blinders. This really hinders people's ability to propose something new and transformative. And finally, prototyping and testing. A prototype is a visual representation of an idea, and these can be simple, like everyone's talked about, like a sketch or a storyboard with some stick figures. But in design thinking, prototyping is important because it's only when you put your ideas out into the world and allow people to interact with them that you'll understand their strengths and weaknesses. And the more you allow people to test and try out your prototypes, the more they will evolve, and the better prepared you will be for when you finally decide to spend time and money on your final solution. So these are the 4 elements that we believe make design thinking different. And now here's what we're hoping to achieve by using design thinking with our clients, with our grantees, I'm sorry. So we think that clients will be better served. Our grantees will now be approaching problem solving with their clients' needs and desires at the forefront. We think that grantees will have stronger programs. We believe that by knowing and applying this methodology, grantees will increase their capacity to solve really challenging problems. And finally, we believe that this will reduce the cost of technical assistance to the government. As we've seen with the traditional approach, we could send somebody out for years and never really address the issue. But if we ask grantees to use design thinking first and then ask for assistance, we may be able to better target the support that we do provide. So here's where we are with our grantees right now. Our 3 pilots will finalize utilizing the methodology to solve their particular problem by the end of December. Then in 2015, we plan to host a webinar for all of our grantee programs to showcase the lessons learned of our 3 pilot grantees. And then, if all goes well and we achieve our outcomes, we hope to integrate design thinking into our technical assistance contracts moving forward. And I'll turn it over to Jared to talk about the other part of our project.
So one thing you might notice, you may have noticed quite a few people that are in our group, and also that we worked on a lot of different problems. We worked at kind of the more traditional entrepreneurial process in the sense that there was a team that was working on a bunch of different challenges, and some of them had bigger impact than others. Some of them were bigger successes than others. I personally worked on like a collaboration vision across the department and revising the TANF data forms that all the states use to report. But I'm going to talk about a couple specific areas that we worked on that kind of relate to defining the problem. One of the components of design thinking that Blair spoke about. My hope is that you can take some of these back to your own office and you can work with that. One of the 2 areas that we worked on was the Online Work Readiness Assessment. The Online Work Readiness Assessment, or ORA, is this great tool that empowers community organizations to essentially get their clients back out into the workforce. It's a series of online forms and reporting tools that make data much more portable with these associations, with these organizations, and with the grantees that we serve in particular. And it's the kind of project that we spent millions of dollars on with social scientists over the years to really get this great tool in place to make it easier to get people into the workforce. So on the plus, it does all of the stuff I just mentioned. Downloadable, reporting, metrics, all that. On the other hand, it has some challenges. So when I was brought in to look at ORA, we realized, or at least the initial problem was, the setup is hard. And it's true, there is a complicated setup. What we started to realize is that maybe if we reframe the problem, which is, how do we get organizations to use this, that we might realize, or as it turned out, that there actually are a number of more challenges that we have to address. Specifically, it's this tool that requires you to set up a Java server and requires you to find some contractor to set it up for you. And it needs to be HIPAA compliant. You don't know what it's going to cost. So we realized that there were some much bigger challenges to getting people to use this really great tool that we built. So we started looking, very similar to many of the projects you all have, at what are some low-cost ways that we can get this to folks. In our particular case, we contacted Amazon Web Services, and we realized that they could provide vendors that could essentially create a turnkey solution where essentially you could say it's going to cost X dollars, and now all of a sudden you can use ORA. They take care of solving what's known as the last mile problem, getting it into people's hands so they can now take advantage of this great tool that we've built. Another one of the problems that I was sort of confronted with, or that we were all confronted with, was we have this website called HPOD Connect for the Health Profession Opportunity Grant website, which has funding opportunity announcements, and also is a site for the grantees to communicate with one another. And we had this problem, which was, we're trying to get our contractors to provide us data about the success of our articles that we're writing. But as we started to dig in, we realized that, there may actually be a bigger problem than just what is the status of the different shares and what is the status of these articles we're writing. So similar to what Kristann pointed out earlier, what is really the impact that's going on? And as we started to look into the data, and as we started to empower ourselves instead of contractors to have this responsibility, we realized that actually there were associations, there were professional organizations that kind of are like already our partners, and they're driving sustainable traffic to our website, but the sharing really isn't doing much. And as a matter of fact, as a whole, the website's not getting that much traffic at all. So what if instead we were to spend some of our time on these articles using Google Analytics, which is a free service that all of you in this room, if you aren't using it for your website, you should be. Just spend an hour, look at the website, you realize in the stats that certain things are working, certain things aren't. There's free tools to learn how to use this. And we devised a plan for contacting organizations that are like AANP, figuring out which of them get a lot of traffic, and essentially saying, hey, link to us, and we'll give you an opportunity for people to apply for our grants. It's a huge, huge win-win, and it's much more sustainable than traditional marketing. So throughout all of this, we kind of looked at, at reframing the problem. We found that there are ways to remove barriers to using these tools. It's not technology. It's not we need a consultant to understand some tech stack. It's what is really the problem we're trying to solve. And we realized, what I saw most working with the ACI is the technology involved in this, it's really easy to understand it just to the level of making an impact and understanding the data. So when we did look at data, it wasn't just can we get the data, it's how do we drive results with that data? How do we drive people to it? So again, we reframe the problem to what we're really trying to accomplish. And lastly, just as an overall entrepreneurial group, that ended up going on to a lot of different projects. We used design thinking for a number of different things. We realized that there's just, it's not necessarily going to be the project you start out with you end up working on, but many of them will have lots and lots of sustainable impact. So what they've done is they've built a process and methodology to empower their hundreds of grantees and also to empower the overall team at ACS to be able to make better decisions using these kinds of things and using design thinking. Thank you.
Thanks, Jared. As you guys are talking, I couldn't help but think back to like a little more than a year ago when you were pitching the project in the first place and you had your big chart. I think you were the only guys that showed up with props. It was great. The thing that really struck me about what actually you guys were doing and you're doing is that you're all using data to affect the way you manage your internal programs, right? And that's something that we need to do a lot more of around here in many different cases. I think too often we don't look back at actually you guys are too, we don't go back and look at the information that we're collecting and say, how can we tweak what we're doing in order to make it better? And that's like a big component of the design thinking stuff as well, which I think is really, for me anyway, very interesting to see. And these are skills that we try to teach with Ignite, for example. We put all the Ignite teams through a 3-day boot camp, and they learn some of these design thinking, design techniques. And I think we would do a lot of good if we could spread that a lot farther around here. So thank you guys. Any questions we have time for a few? Yeah. Yeah. Go for it.
So I'm Scott Corr from ACL, the other agency. How are you going to push this out to your regional offices and make the folks in your regions aware of what it is that you're doing and how to be able to take advantage of the work you've done?
In both projects?
Yeah.
So monthly we have one OFA call, so our regional offices participate in those, and we provided midpoint reviews basically about our project, which has covered both sides with them. We actually had that last week. For design thinking, since they weren't able to participate in some of the in-person trainings that we've had here in Washington, we did a webinar in early 2015 with them so that they could learn more about it that way. And we've actually, our director is pretty into the stuff that Jared's been doing. And so Jared's actually doing a presentation tomorrow for a lot of people in our office on Google Analytics and how it can be used and applied for both people in here at headquarters and also out.
And a big part of our work actually was, which I didn't touch on today because I wanted to sort of simplify the message, was on collaboration tools and techniques. So through that work, actually everyone now have webcams for everyone in the office, and we've done a lot more with kind of video technology and collaboration and one source of information, things like that. So.
The one thing that I would add to that too is that we're planning the webinars that we mentioned, where we're going to share the results of the grantees that we're working with. And we're pretty optimistic that there will be some pretty compelling stories in that too. One of the grantees that we're working with is the Confederated Tribe of Celeste Indians. And there they were trying to do joint case management with lots of different community organizations, but they were finding that those organizations weren't coming to the meeting. And so through the design thinking process, they started asking questions of all of their stakeholders. And what they discovered was it wasn't so much about busy schedules or lack of motivation or something like that. But one of the key problems was that there's not a shared release of information, so that when people come to that meeting, they're not comfortable sharing in the way that would be most helpful to the people that they're serving. So I think that if that story is told more broadly, and stories like that from the other grantees, that the regions are going to be interested in adopting it. More grantees are going to be interested in adopting it.
And if the grantees can use the techniques, to affect the outcomes of the populations they're trying to serve, that's just a massive, massive win for everyone.
Yeah.
All right, I think we have to move on. Thank you guys very much. All right, our final HHS Entrepreneur team for this year, Mark is going to talk from ONC. I believe that ONC actually has their annual awards
I
ceremony.
just realized I must not be getting an award.
In absentia.
Hi, my name is Mark. I'm with the Office of National Coordinator, and my project is Health Information Exchange Accelerators. Let's start with some bad news, some very disturbing trends in healthcare spending that probably many of us in this room are aware. And for our project, our attack point was here, hospital readmission. Roughly $25 billion a year that we waste when patients leave the hospital and they end up going back to the hospital in 30 days needlessly. And the reason for this is poor care transitions. And what leads to that is it's sometimes very difficult for doctors to even be alerted that their patients have discharged from the hospital. The care team finds it cumbersome to exchange information, to provide proper care coordination. And many of the care team members are in different organizations, have different systems, have different skill sets. And all of this leads to a bad environment for managing this transition out of the hospital into home. The good news is that it's clearly been shown that if you can intervene with these patients and you can do something in this transition, you can see a 30% reduction in this hospital readmission rate. Even something as simple as discharge alerting. So notifying the doctor that their patient's been discharged so they can follow up shows a dramatic decrease in the rate of hospital readmission. So the question was, and really the purpose of this project, how do we solve the problems that lead to and hinder bad care transitions? The grand solution here is interoperability, and my presentation would have been rejected by ONC if I did not at least mention the national coordinator's 10-year vision to create an interoperable health network due out for public comment in January. Look forward to that. But the point of interoperability is really an economic shift. It's really to drop the bottom out of the cost of health data transactions. And you want to think of this project as really working on the demand side of that economic shift. So we put up a toolkit of software that if you become interoperable and use standard data formats, you can use this toolkit to reduce readmissions. We created like an economic incentive to become interoperable. So this is an architecture diagram of the toolkit that we put together. All you really need to know about this is that this is a high-functioning health information exchange platform. So a bunch of clinics and hospitals could get together and they could use this to exchange information, right? And what we wanted to do with this was make something that was very scalable. So we built it out of a whole set of national standards. But more importantly, we also wanted to make something that was inexpensive for people to deploy. So we built this exclusively out of open source components. So the color codes here show how the different open source components fill in the feature gaps you need to create this platform. And I think it's worth mentioning that there's got to be at least $100 million worth of software here that we're bringing to bear on this issue of hospital readmissions through this project. One thing I'd like to talk about is the Tacoma project really quickly. Tacoma is a code word for a joint CMS ONC project to create a set of software tools for doing electronic quality measurement. And we were able to take that tool set and refactor it a little bit to provide clinical support services inside of the platform. So basically we took an existing HHS asset that was being built to measure performance and changed it to make it drive performance. We wanted to make things a little less complex than that previous slide. So we rewrapped all of the tools there in our go-to-market name of BEAT, the Basic Encounter Alert Toolkit. So let me give you an example of a deployment of BEAT so you can feel for how it works and its impact. So Essen Medical in the Bronx has teamed up with Bronx Lebanon Hospital to grab all the discharges of congestive heart failure patients, specifically to try and avoid readmission. So Essen Medical has a house calls program, so they have 40 physicians kind of roaming throughout the Bronx, making sure that these patients get good care transitions. And the problem Essen has is that they're losing money at this right now. I think they see the vision of having a house calls program, but it's not profitable for them. And the reason for that is that the tool set they're using, it's paper, it's fax, spreadsheets, and it causes them to need 3 care coordinators to handle about 12 patients a week. So we did a deployment at Essen of the BEAT toolkit. We converted their paper process to a fully automated BPM 2.0 compliant business process. They were receiving discharge information from the patient as paper. We converted that to electronic so we could run clinical rules against it and inform the process. And now those 3 care coordinators can handle 50 or more patients a week.
So our original goal with this project, we really set out to get 2 or 3 organizations to test this, and we blew way past that goal. We actually have 3 companies now who are building professional services offerings out of the toolkit. One of those companies is about to get some venture funding to do this, and they're now to the point where they're actually managing a true pipeline. So we have some organizations already in deployment. We've got a few that are teed up, and about 18 other organizations, probably more than that now, that are at least 50% probable to go to deployment in the next few weeks or next few months through these 3 organizations. Another piece of sustainability, in the High Tech Act, we funded a bunch of regional extension centers that are managed by ONC, and their funding is about to run out next year. So they're now directing some of that funding to take the toolkit and package it up so the extension center staff can take it to providers and use it to provide alerting services so that they can avoid readmission. Also, the High Tech Act provided $550 million to create state health information exchanges, and luckily there's still $35 million that was not spent in that. And so we're redeploying that $35 million. A significant portion will go out in January, the new grant opportunity, specifically on deploying the learning toolkit. And finally, my last point, outside of my employment costs, we got this far, and we spent 0 federal dollars on this program. And the reason I bring that up is because that would not have been possible without incredible support I got from ONC and from the CTO's office. So, thank you.
So I can't stress, by the way, how important I think this particular solution is to the whole healthcare ecosystem. I mean, when you think about the fact that ONC is like completely focused on interoperability right now, and that this basically provides a sort of out-of-the-box open source solution from components that were actually built here a while back. I mean, this is kind of amazing, right? And the fact that you guys have as many organizations already jumping onto the platform, you know, like right at the beginning of it, including folks out there in the for-profit world building support offerings around it, I think speaks volumes to the value that this stuff brings. So I think this is amazing work. I'm sorry, we have a few minutes for questions. Any questions for Mark?
Okay, I have a comment. So I'm just sitting back here and I'm observing, and I think it's amazing because what all these entrepreneurs to me have in common is lean implementation. I do not think any of these projects would have been successful if they had not implemented lean in some ways, whether or not it was the direct methodology or just the lean concept. And I think we need to really pay attention here because if you're not familiar with lean, lean is basically it's eliminating anything that is not valuable to your customer through your product or your service. So if we implemented this culture into the government, and some agencies have, and they're doing very successful. Imagine how much time we could be saving, how much money we could be saving, employee satisfaction would increase, the American as a customer would be happier, and I'm not in leadership, but if I was, I would really be paying attention to this and really thinking, how can I bring this to my office or my organization or to my agency?
It sounds like what you're suggesting is all HHS employees should be on a 12-month.
I was going to say, what an amazing plug for HHS Ignite. No, but I think it's a good point, right? I mean, the whole concept here is that if you only have a limited period of time, what decisions do you make differently in order to get something off the ground, to get something out there? How do we take calculated risks and actually try to build something that generates data that allow us to make better decisions to move forward in a rapid fashion? And that's really, I think you're right. I think across the board, that's kind of what's happening here. Yeah, absolutely.
Being in this agency means that every single one of us is dealing with vulnerable populations, but in a different way, because we're all different departments. That all of us are trying to get a more granular look at the populations we serve, and we sometimes can't get that information. So if we could even share amongst ourselves at a central point of the actual characteristics of the populations we're serving, even by geographic that, we need information. And we don't always have, you know, a direct path to it. I have a feeling that a lot of us don't know what each other's actually gathering.
Funny, it's a good point. I wanted to make one more comment to one thing here. The Entrepreneurs program, we also all talk amongst ourselves a lot, and because of that interaction, I was able, like, with learning a lot about what Alan and Richard were doing at NTED, to basically, you know, connect their work with the interoperability roadmap in a way that I think, and luckily no one's here from ONC, but someone from ONC said to me when we first suggested this, I said, CMS is kind of doing something with their NTED that could make it a national source of truth for provider services. And someone said, well, come on, it's just one guy. I'm like, well, yeah, it's just one guy, but it's Alan Viars. It's very different than I think they've come around to that because I talked more about Alan and Richard's project than about my own someday, about how important that work is to interoperability.
I mean, it's sort of an interesting point, though, right? We're used to, in government, just one guy not being able to do anything at all because of all the stuff that you have to go through to do things, right? But every single one of these projects is really, you know, just one or two or a few people, you know, kind of working hard to accomplish something in a short period of time. So it's a really interesting point.
So, Mark, I think you've made a couple good points about this interoperability roadmap and sort of dug into this, trying to figure out what it means for the enterprise across the country, mostly in terms of the private sector efforts that are sort of either at risk or will benefit from whatever comes out of this. And to me, I think it's overemphasizing policy areas rather than highlighting the innovation side. And this, we don't, as I've seen it currently constructed, doesn't have any components to it that really addresses here are some solutions that have been created as a consequence of all the infrastructure that's emerged out of high-tech. And I've been trying to bring these kinds of stories into that focus where it's not just a lot of words about policy. So do you have any ideas about how to change the course? There's still time. I just have felt.
Again, fortunately, no one from ONC is here to hear that comment because they are very heavily policy focused, and there's almost an avoidance to touch actual tools and actual things because they get burned sometimes. I'm like, well, you're the government, the role of the government. You're stifling innovation if you dictate and prescribe how to do things. We just want you to set the rules of the game. And so it's a big struggle in ONC, especially as they're delivering grant money and trying to pick and choose winners in the industry through a program like Meaningful Use. I think they're just heavily burned right now, especially through Meaningful Use, because there's so much money deployed and so many people established in the industry and so many unintended consequences that there's. You've probably seen a lot of leadership is gone now from ONC. I think a lot of because of that. I think there's just kind of a hands-off approach, which is unfortunate. So I don't have a good answer other than the basic encounter alerting toolkit.
All right, I think we got to move on. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it. All right, and now we're going to slightly shift gears a little bit to Nag Murthy, who's one of our current innovator in residency. A slightly different program. For those of you who aren't familiar with this one, basically we partner with a nonprofit organization around a topic that's of mutual interest to both HHS and that nonprofit. That nonprofit then funds a 2-year fellow within HHS. We recruit from the outside world to bring somebody in and then basically let them go. One interesting thing about this, whereas the Entrepreneur-in-Residence program is really focused on solving specific problems, the IIR is really focused on a topic, and we don't tell them what the solutions are. We let them go and figure out solutions on their own. So, Nag, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, and the very fact that you don't have a problem to solve makes it a bit scary initially, and it also makes it exciting later on. My name is Nag Murthy. I am the West Health Institute's Innovation-in-Residence. The way it works is it's a 2-year fellowship, which is sponsored by the West Health Institute, and they pretty much let me, run around, define my problem areas, and then try and solve that over the course of 2 years. And I get to spend an equal amount of time over at the HHS and at the West Health Institute. The cool part about that is I get to draw upon the best of both worlds. So I get to, draw upon West Health's resources, their expertise, as well as the immense wealth of talent that I find, within the Entrepreneurs program and other objectives within the HHS. And this is pretty interesting to me because in my previous life, I was a medtech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, and it was a very different sort of experience. And this has been a very interesting experience as well. As the IIR, I've been mostly focused on a few different projects in patient engagement, and today I'm going to talk about one of those projects called Project Sandbox. And in trying to understand patient engagement, sitting here in the Humphrey building, it's a little bit of, you feel like this guy out there. It's sort of, you don't really feel a sense of emotive connect with your patient. And so what we did within Project Sandbox was when I say we, I hope you know all those people who are there working with me on that project. We embedded ourselves within a provider model, which we thought was a great example of patient engagement. And that provider model is nothing but the house calls model that Mark talked about. I'll describe it in a little more detail later on as we go into the presentation. We chose to study this group because it's one of the most striking examples of patient engagement that you will find out there. Because it's literally getting out of the clinic and going to meet the patient where they are, which is really interesting. And it does not make sense for all patients out there, admittedly. It makes sense for a very specific subset of patients, and we'll discover who those are shortly. And before we go into the model, I'd want all of you to sort of close your eyes and I'll walk you through a little empathy exercise to try and see the world through the eyes of the patient. I'm not going to pull a magic trick or walk out of the room. So just close your eyes. I'll talk you through the story. So imagine yourself as very old, very, very old, right? You mostly use a wheelchair to get around. You have very little mobility. Your memory is fading. You don't remember when you had lunch or when you took your pills the last time. Your children live thousands of miles away, and a home health nurse checks in on you every now and then, if you're lucky. Your social circle has begun to slowly fade away, and it's heavily circumscribed by your home. You can't get out all that often. Now it's 5 in the evening on a lonely Sunday, and you begin to feel a tightening in your chest. You initially put it off. You think it's nothing. But then slowly over time, panic sets in. Your breath grows shorter and shorter. Your heart beats faster and faster. What happens to you next? You may now open your eyes. What happens to you next? What happens to you next is this, 911. You dial an emergency room service. You get into the emergency room. The paramedics will rush you there, followed by a hospitalization, some scary invasive procedures which you never asked for. And then you're discharged back home, and then it's a revolving door, over and over again. But once you get into the hospital, it's a well-noted fact that you tend to go back there shortly after, and this is all the more true for frail elderly people. And now this is not an isolated incident. About 5% of our Medicare population, or about 2.5 million frail elderly, actually are subjected to the vagaries of a healthcare system that's making them go through this depersonalized or impersonal, episodic, patch-fixing healthcare, which they don't really want, and they don't ask for it. If you really ask them, they'll tell you that they'd rather live out their remaining years in the comfort and the dignity of their home. But what we're subjecting them to instead is, these ER visits and hospitalizations. They'd give anything to avoid it. And it turns out it's also very interesting from a cost perspective, not just a humane perspective. 5% of these Medicare patients, they drive 50% of this cost. Now this is a staggering. This is Pareto principle at finest, right? Like you've got a small amount of issues driving large changes. And so the question we want to ask ourselves is this: how do we care for our frail elders in ways that they might want to be cared for? put yourself in their shoes and ask that question. At the same time, deliver high-quality, low-cost care. It turns out that there is a solution out there, and now we're going to hark back to, the 19th century practice of house calls, which Mark was talking about. So you don't wait for these patients to show up in your clinic. You actually go to them. And it turns out that there's this small but growing group of providers called home-based primary care providers. This was initially started off as a VA 25 years ago almost. And it's been picked up by a small but really passionate group of providers who have begun making house calls to these frail elderly patients in their homes. And the way it works is it's a team. There's usually a geriatrician or an internalist or internist along with a nurse practitioner and social workers who will make monthly or frequent visits to these patients. And the objective of this model of care really is to be preventive, is to keep the patient at home, is to sort of put a lid on these situations which can exacerbate into like an emergency room visit. So all this is great, right? I mean, and it seems to work really well. Studies have in fact shown that 17% of Medicare costs could be saved if this model had widespread adoption. Those are huge numbers, and they've actually gone on to show that they save about $4,000 per beneficiary per year if you talk about this cohort of patients. Not only that, the caregivers and the patients themselves think this is a great way to take care of them. So what's the problem, right? Why hasn't this model scaled? This is where the IR program sort of decided to take up this question as its focus. And if you think about it, medicine today has been set up in service of efficiency. It's pretty much like the assembly line. The doctor sits in the office, patients flow in and out, right? That makes logical sense. That's the way you realize the most efficient process. But what if the patient can't leave their home and come to visit you? What happens then? The system's broken for something like that. And so what happens in those cases? It turns out that in those cases when the doctor has to go visit the patient, it's a highly inefficient process. Medicare does not reimburse you for your travel time, so there's a huge opportunity cost, right? And also you can't see as many patients as you could see sitting in your clinic. So what happens as a result is you'll find most house call practices out there are actually running in the red. They run about 30% in the red. They're loss-making, which is another thing Mark pointed out in his presentation. And so how do you sort of fix this problem? The way we went about doing it was we said, let's look at the NPs or the providers as they go about their day. Let's look at how they spend their time. And we actually codified their activities into discrete processes, right? Things like drive a car from point A to point B, park the car, get your supplies out of the car, go knock on the door, open the door, see if the patient's there. And so you sort of, we discretized their activities and we actually mapped it out. And this is like a heat map. It's an example heat map. It's representative of what the nurse practitioner does. And we looked at green versus red, which is the value-added time and the non-value-added time. So how much of time was actually spent in service of the patient versus how much of time was spent in all the other, fluff activities. And it turns out that it's pretty interesting. They spend a lot of their time actually doing things like finding a parking spot, organizing their supplies. And this is pretty amazing if you think about it, right? It's a great opportunity to actually sort of help. It's a great design problem right there. How do you actually improve the operational efficiencies of this model? And if you do end up doing that, you will actually end up making these models profitable. And as a result, if they become profitable, the next logical step is they're going to scale and they're going to create impact. So we chose to address the problem that way, and I think Mark's doing the same thing with his tool in some sense, because he's also addressing the back office operational efficiencies, is what he talked about. We're talking about not only back office, but we're also talking about the efficiencies in the other parts of the value chain, right? And it turns out that when we did the analysis, we crunched through the data for our provider partners, and we found that if you actually look through all these issues and you optimize them, you can reduce almost 20 to 25% of cost out of the system, which is a really huge number, right? And it also turns out that most of these problems, things like routing, scheduling, these are not new problems. other industries, right? Ask FedEx, ask Uber. They figured this out. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? And so what we really wanted to do was, in Project Sandbox, we didn't set about actually fixing things right away. We actually stepped back and said, how can we actually create a clarion call to drive the innovation effort towards these specific problems? We said, how might we channel the innovation effort towards improving reimbursement and reducing operating costs for a home-based primary care model? And I was lucky enough that West Health was very supportive, and they've actually been very engaged as we've described the problem to them. And now what we've been able to do is funnel more and more resources from West Health into actually setting up these problems and engaging with problem solvers out there. And so the hope is, like I said again, once we solve these innovation problems, we'll improve profitability, influence scalability, and thereby we'll end up creating impact. So what we've done thus far, and these are ongoing projects because mine's a 2-year fellowship, it's an ongoing process. So where we are at right now is we've got efforts ongoing to try and improve revenue for house call models, and efforts ongoing to try and reduce costs for the house call model. Under improving revenue, we've managed to get support from the West Health Policy Center in lobbying for and advocating for Medicare reimbursement reform. And this has primarily got to do with trying to push for a shared savings program that CMMI actually is experimenting with right now, which will implement a shared savings model for the house call practices, specifically for the frail elderly. So the thought there is, if Medicare can share some of those 17% cost savings that we talked about before, that might automatically go towards making these models sustainable. There's another effort under consideration where we're trying to convince West Health and other funders to say, can you de-risk some of the initial engagements between providers and payers to say, both of you are hesitant to try this model out. Why don't we create a social impact fund to actually seed some of to provide the de-risking capital, like a couple $100,000 of de-risking capital, to get people to adopt solutions such as Mark's, right? And to get providers and payers to the table and say, can we actually kickstart this innovation effort? It's still under consideration. We don't know where it'll go. And lastly, we've started undertaking 3 different projects under the operations optimization piece, where we're saying this is an area that's ripe for predictive analytics. How do you use predictive analytics to actually, do increased targeting to sort of optimize the service basket for these patients? How do you re-envision, or how do you envision the mobile NP office of the future, right? So can you take this nurse practitioner's car and retrofit it with, different things that will help make their visits more efficient? Think of like a Uber-like dashpad. Think of mobile diagnostic kits. All this is easily a 5-year play or a 10-year play. But in my role as the IIR, I did not want to focus on actually solving or building for problems. That was very tempting. It came naturally to me. But Bryan and Greg encouraged me to sort of think of how do you create a system that can actually lead to others solving the problem. So hopefully, we'll sort of make some more headway on this. And yeah, so that's basically where we're at. And like I said, the goal is, no slide here, but the goal is, so it's a blank canvas. That's what the goal is. The future can contain all sorts of interesting possibilities. And I think our role, and when I say we, I'd like to point out Kristann, Mindy, and Will, who's not here, who really sort of helped put all of this together. We really want to convince, West Health and other funders and folks in the government to say, we've identified the problems for you. We're laying out a roadmap. Now we want you to sort of continue to sort of support and fund this. Because if you do this, then the path to impact is very clear. So that's where we're at, and hopefully I'll be able to give you a more exciting update a year from now, once we've got some of these things off.
Thank you, Nog. Yeah, so we got time for one or two questions. I could say a lot about Nog, but I'll leave it up to you guys. He's doing some amazing work.
So I had a quick question about the reform-based approach. So I was trying to understand. So you are suggesting that there's a pilot study that shows that the high percentage cost patients will say we can prove that home-based care, right, ends up saving money on their care, that you would have to CMS some of the payers to increase that reimbursement activity for that care,
Yes.
for that patient.
Yes, CMS has actually already implemented a pilot through CMMI. It's called the Independence of Can Demo, and they are testing out these models of care. What we're saying is, we'll bat on behalf of the providers and sort of take up their cause with other payers, not just CMS. Because the evidence is, it's been piling up and it's overwhelming now, at least in our eyes. Now we need to sort of find a way to, shout it out loudly enough from the roof.
So I would like, when we do our presentation in the afternoon, I'd like to talk a little bit about that. So we're setting up some innovation centers for patient management, but still having that source.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to connect whoever I know.
Just a quick question. Would it ever be possible to incentivize or subsidize the cost of travel and parking in the course of care? I mean, is there any way to look at that and make more economic sense if it really is having an impact on the overall cost of care for Medicare?
So I think for the longest amount of time, that was the thrust area to try and get travel funded. But now I think there's a bigger push towards shared savings because, these studies have shown that, if you implement a shared savings program, hopefully they'll sort of show that there's enough money to be split between payer and provider. So I think the providers are trying to take that approach over trying to get more reimbursement codes under a fee for service. But I think they're taking a multi-pronged strategy. I'm not aware of any ongoing efforts to get travel funded, but there could be efforts out there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've seen so much in the immersive tech space around, obviously people using iPads and mobile devices to do, particularly the mid-tier providers and practitioners, business assistants and so forth, where they can just get paid even like $30 an hour between things to do visits with people when you just have a common cold. Is there a lot with video or with immersive technologies you're looking into as the same way to deliver these services?
Yeah, and Kristann, you should talk to that basically because you've got.
Yeah, when I was at Hewlett Packard, I spent a bit of time looking at telemedicine. So that is, some of the things we're also looking at technology. So when Nog talked about predictive analytics, one of the things that's unique about the frail elderly is they don't follow a common path through an illness, if you want to call it that. So if I get a heart attack at age 50, there's a common way to and a timeline for curing me. But a frail elderly person has these multiple issues. So instead of saying, okay, I'm going to schedule you for a 3 months later visit, can we use things like something that's managing their heart rate, something that's watching to see if they fall on the floor, something like that actually helps us do more predictive scheduling based on their needs rather than some timeline.
I just want to say one thing, though, right? Specifically with this population, a lot of the people that I've talked to in this universe, we're quick to jump to technology solutions because I think a lot of us are technologists, right? But when you look at the stuff that Nog kind of surfaced from actually watching people, it's nothing to do with technology. It's like get somebody in a car to drive it around, right? Yeah. And let's standardize supplies, right? I mean, these are like the low-hanging fruit that we can pick up that are well before we get into sensors and telemedicine and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of easy.
And one of the other things that applies to both Nog's presentation and Mark's is that we view this from the human services side. It's what can you do to keep a person from being admitted? How can an older adult be supported by caregivers and supported services so that they can stay in their homes, so they can stay where they want to be and not enter this spiral of increasing medicalization that ultimately ends to their death more often than not prematurely because they can't have control of their own, they can't be independent and they can't make choices. So essentially be able to make choices that allow them to be independent and prevent medical decisions. Because it's not pointed out, and this is the perfect lead-in for our presentation, as soon as you enter that, the costs skyrocket. So,
I think that's a very well-made point, and that's something that we hear from all providers out there, that the social work component of their practice is probably just as important as the clinical piece. And sending a handyman home to sort of fix, things like the carpets and making things elderly accessible, it probably goes a lot longer, or goes a longer way than just providing them with clinical care. So that's absolutely spot on.
yeah.
Love the presentation. I'm really passionate about the position. So, a great company called PillPad, to your point, Brian, about not really focused on technology. I didn't even know this population compliance with their medication. So what PillPad has done is when you fulfill a prescription, they send you a package with amazing instructions on what to do. So whether you're a caregiver or if you're an elderly person, you know exactly what time you should take it, the instructions of how you should take the medication. It's really phenomenal. And it's one really minor tweak, nothing really innovative, just again how they want to package their pills. It's really changing the game, I think, possibly. Also, there's a company in New York called Pager that's trying to do exactly what you all are doing with the house calls. It might be
absolutely, and that's what the sandbox is about, is to sort of get all these technologies and try them out and sort of say, here's the problem, let's start with the problem and then let's try out solutions. And so we probably end up trying out a few of those over the course of time.
One more question.
Well, it's not really a question, too. I would highly recommend you also look at underserved communities, because what we're noticing in the National Health Service Corps program is that our providers who are providing primary care to rural populations, where populations don't have much, are building in those efficiencies and trying to get to patients where they need the care. And so I would highly encourage you to sort of look at some of those models in underserved areas, because they are, doing things more with less, and you might find some innovative ideas around that.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, so one more round of applause for everybody. I love going out there and telling the stories about all this work that people are doing, both in the first cohort and the second cohort, and now after lunch we'll learn about the new cohort and the third cohort. It's just great work, and I think a lot of people across government can learn a lot of lessons from how you guys have approached these projects. Places where, challenges have met and gone around, places where things haven't worked and, we've had to do something different. I think there's just a ton of really, really interesting things that come out of this program. That's it for the morning. I want to say thank you to the people on the webinar and who've been listening in as well. And we had a whole bunch of registrations for this, and I saw some tweets go by as people were talking, so I know there's at least a few people out there watching and paying attention. But thanks for joining us. We're going to disconnect now, and I think Julie, you'll tell us what the deal is for the rest of the afternoon, right?
Okay, yeah. So the plan is that everyone should go up and get lunch in the top floor in the cafeteria, and then you could come downstairs to the executive dining room where we have tables set up, so people can talk. And I have a few treats to incentivize you to come.